Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Wednesday. It is Wednesday today. Yeah, Wednesday afternoon's lecture. Today we'll be discussing sequential files again. So we'll be finishing off the slide set. If you have not seen our tutorial yesterday, the 29th of September, I suggest you go and look at either Mr. Cottrell's tutorial or my tutorial in the evening, Mr. Cottrell in the morning. Mr. Cottrell went through one of the past papers essentially. So your Prac 9 is one of the past papers, the one where you had the Rhino and the rarity function. So he used that and he used it with a file as well and showed you how to use the file in the binary format and saving to a file and what happens to that file as well. In the evening for the tutorial that I did, we basically went out and we tried to break the functions themselves. So we looked at the file stream, we looked at the binary formatter, we looked at what they do, we looked at the different options. I briefly showed you the different options for the enumerations inside of them. We will be discussing enumerations today. I haven't released slides for enumerations yet. We just put one example slide in the slide set, but I actually want to give you a slide set of enumeration itself because there's a lot more you can do with enumerations than just use it as a placeholder. Right. So some announcements. We've been receiving some emails regarding the opportunity for people that missed out the first semester test. Now, please note, I am saying it again here. I'm assuming none of you are the guilty culprits, but we've announced it multiple times that there's going to be another opportunity. We've announced it multiple times that you need to use the Google form to apply for this opportunity. We've also announced multiple times that the information is on Eve. Any information that needs to be relayed to you will be put on Eve first, and then will be discussed during a lecture or a tutorial, but most likely during a lecture, but it will always be posted on Eve. Any announcements made on Discord is informal. Any announcements on Eve are formal, can be considered final. So if you email us regarding the first semester test, we'll simply just ignore your email from here on out because we've discussed it multiple times. Now, if you are still confused about it, if you missed the first semester test, you need to fill in the Google form, submit the relevant documentation stating why you missed the first opportunity and the SSA, and you need to be aware of when the semester test will be, which is next week, Monday at 9 a.m. This is the last time I'll be mentioning it. Like I said, it's most likely not for any of you listening to the recordings or here live, because you do actually follow the instructions. If you have any queries regarding practicals, please do make sure you use the Google link as well. We will be looking at that as of next week. So if your mark still hasn't changed or your practical still hasn't been marked, just put a comment on the Google form that we've released and we'll have a look at that next week. During this week, we're finalizing your exam and your second semester test. So the scope for the second semester test up until now will be everything we've done thus far. And the scope for your second semester test is everything we do up until the week before the semester test. So everything we do up until next week, Thursday, but we will discuss the semester test 2 in a bit more details next week, or in a bit more detail next week. All right. So if there are no further questions regarding on those two matters, let's continue with lectures today. So at any point, if you are slightly lost, please do just point it out to us and we'll have a look at it. So the first things first, we're going to look at our last lecture. We're just going to finish off our lecture and then we'll continue with the work for today. Let's see, I think my screen is still set up for you. Yes, it is. All right, so just as a very brief recap, we've discussed file streams and that the fact that the file stream itself is a temporary storage for the file. So the file stream that is in your code, essentially, when you create my file equals new file stream and you put all the access methods there, it simply represents that that is now the file. That represents your file, and that needs to be handled as if it is the file. So if you add anything to it, it's going to override it from the top. So when you work with it, make sure you preserve the information inside. If you're writing something new, so if you're creating and writing something new, then it's empty in any case. If you're opening it up, make sure you preserve the information if you're going to override it again. Just something that we pointed out during our lecture last night. Then we have two differences of files that we'll be discussing. We've got sequential means of storing data in a file, so our sequential files, which is one object after the other. I showed you last night that when you store it in this manner, if you open it up in a text file editor, everything is basically on one line. It's not multiple lines, so it's items separated by a tab identified in Visual Studios. When you read it again, it looks at those tabs and that separates the items for you. Random access works slightly differently, but that we'll get to when we start with random access, which we'll potentially start with tomorrow, depending on how far we get today. We've got the binary formatter. We discussed the library for the binary formatter. We looked at the import as well. During my lecture, I discussed why this is important, and we used the example of the math library as well, where as soon as it gets a bit longer, you need to use everything inside the library, where it's easier to import it than just use the entire stream. Now, keep in mind, private binary formatter, or BF, as system.runtime.serialization.formatters.binary.binary formatter. The binary formatter is the function or the method you're going to be using. Essentially, it's the data type, if you call it the data type class, inside that library that you'll be using. Now, every time you use something, initiate something, declare an object of that class, you need to use the entire library itself. So when you have to declare a new instance object of this BF or of binary format type, you have to go BF equals new and the entire library location once again. Now, this line doesn't actually do it justice because this line only shows you the declaration of the variable, but every time you create a new instance of this variable, you'll have to use the entire library location or directory, or identify where that specific class is located. It's one of the reasons why we import it, because then you only have that information located once and not multiple times. So you can use the binary formatter when you declare it, and you can just use the binary formatter declaring or creating a new instance of that specific binary formatter. For instance, here where you say new binary formatter, you would have had to have the entire line in front of it as well. Otherwise, it will give you an error and tell you it's not identified or not declared. All right. Then we went through, we spoke about serialize and deserialize. We serialize is when we write to a file, and deserialize is when we read from a file. Serialization is basically just the fact that we're converting it from one object to another object type. In this case, serialize means that we're converting it into our binary for our files. So it's being stored in a language that the system understands. And deserialize converts it back from what the system understands into something that you understand, so into the specific format that you want it to. So therefore, we need to make sure we use the correct direct cast or conversion methods. If you're just using strings, you need to convert it to a string or an integer. You need to convert it to an integer. And if you're converting into a custom data type, the classes that you create, then you need to make sure you direct cast it into those custom types. Now, you can also use a try cast if you want it to give you a null if it's not successful, then you can do that as well. But as we discussed, the direct cast is in most cases the more appropriate method to use, because it doesn't leave you with a situation where your variable is empty, is essentially a null or nothing. So we identified in the code that we discussed that there's going to be two errors. Now, two errors are present. The first requires that you convert the retrieve item. So that talks about this some item equals binary formatter dot deserialize the file stream. Now what's going on here, it's taking what you have in this file stream. Now, if you looked at the tutorial, you know that this will most likely be inside a while loop, whether there is something in the file stream, but we'll get to that in a second. But essentially, you need to convert this. You need to direct cast this into your custom data type. So some item is of some class. Is it on this? Where is it now? There. Some item is of some class. So you need to make sure that you convert that object that you're retrieving back into some class. So you need to have your direct cast at the front, your binary formatter.deserialize, grab the object. So when you do deserialize, and when you do serialize, it's saving or retrieving an individual item. So you're working with an individual item or an individual object. If I'm referring to an object, I'm referring to the entire object that you'll be saving. So if you have an array of objects or an array of some classes, in this case, each object in that array is identified individually with the deserialize and deserialize. So you don't save the entire array and say, for instance, over here, some item, if this was an array, save the entire array like that. You would save it item by item. So using a for loop, you'll save it, or a while loop, depending on how you want to approach it. Now, the second issue, the second cause your program, the second causes your program to crash when you deserialize method over here. All right. So when we look at this, when we break it down, deserialize is actually a function, which means it's returning something. But what is it returning? The deserialize returns information, but somehow we need to convert this into the item that we want. So the first issue is that blob of information being converted back needs to be compatible with the information you want to store. Same with when you're getting information from a text box or from a input box and you're converting it to an integer. You might be receiving text back, but you need to convert that into the appropriate data type that you want to use. And because our class is of a custom data type, or are of a custom data type, you need to make sure that we cast it into that data type, so our direct cast. Now, keep in mind that when we're storing to a file, we know what file format we're using in terms of what object we're storing into the file. We need to make sure when we're retrieving it for that specific object type as well. You can store multiple object types, but then you'll have a few checks to make sure that you're retrieving the correct information or converting the correct information. Otherwise, this might crash on you. Always keep that in mind. Now, the second issue you'll have is the fact that the class itself, the sum class we have, was not serializable. Now, that tag itself gets entered before the public, so it says serializable public class or serializable public structure or private. Sorry, I'm saying private, but it's before the modifier. You'll have the serializable tag. The only thing the serializable tag does is give you permission to convert it. All it says is this can be converted for a stream. This can be converted into a binary or whatever format you want to save into the stream that allows you to save it. But the nice thing is Visual Studios will tell you if you're missing that tag. It will tell you that tag is missing. If you're unsure of what that looks like, you can watch the tutorial from last night where I specifically went and made the error happen and showed you where in the error message it tells you you need to give permission. You need to allow it to be convertible, serializable. Right. Now, that's where we ended off with our lecture on Monday. So to continue, so we go back to the top. Our class needs to be given the serializable tag, our sum class, to allow it to be converted. If we don't do that, we can't save it to a file. Then we still have our two imports. We've got our import.io for our file stream, and we've got our imports, our system.runtime.serialization.formatters.binary. Now, if you can't remember which library specifically it is, if you write out the binary formatter, it will most likely highlight it for you and tell you what the location is. Most of the times, it's very nice in predicting what library you're trying to use and will suggest that you import that library. Then we showed you an example of using a constant for the file name. You don't have to do this. To my knowledge, we don't actually give you a mark for this. This just makes it a bit easier because that file name will be used multiple times. So having a constant variable for it, which means it will never change, is ideal because then you can use the variable name and make sure that the information here is always correct. This is especially useful if you're using a directory to find your file and not using a local file inside the executable folder root. Right, so all of this you're still aware of. But this time we've got an array of our classes, so I'll show you how to use that. Then we've got our button input, so code for instantiating and entering data into our items. So this just basically fills that item array with information. So right now we're not concerned about that because you've been it the entire semester and we know you know how to do that. So we're only focusing on the actual file stream. And this is where things get useful. Let me just look at the questions quickly before continuing. So the imports are declared outside a class, just like option statements. Yes, it's declared at the top. Generally, it will be the first things below your option statements. So it's directly above your class and most likely directly below your option statements. And if you forget your option statements, it will be at the top. What happens if you don't close? Then it crashes the next time you try to open it. It's something we showed last night as well. So it won't crash the first time you run it. It will crash the second time you try and run it because the stream will still be open. Keep in mind that's when the application is live. When you close the application, but the application itself dies, the stream automatically gets closed by the Visual Studios, which makes it nice. But in other applications, if you forget to close the file stream will remain open until you close it. I'm assuming you've heard about a memory leak before. So if you don't do garbage collection, the memory leak keeps on adding to the memory, never gets emptied out, and your machine will start slowing down over time. Slower and slower and slower until eventually you're forced to restart your machine to clear out the entire system. So the same thing here, but luckily Visual Studios will close it for you. But in the same application, when you try and open that file again, it will not allow you to open it. It will crash at that point. And it's not always a consistent message that you what it crashes. All right. So in order to write to this file, we need to write the objects individually to the file. So the serialization option or function writes an object one at a time. So you need to get the number of items in your array, go through a for loop, and add each item to your file one by one. I'm assuming there's no issues here. We've discussed in the tutorial yesterday, and I didn't see a lot of questions regarding this. It seemed like you guys were okay with this, guys and girls. I'm using guys as a collection, not as a identifier. Right. So if there's any issues with this, please just watch the stream. If you're still having issues with this, we can discuss it in tomorrow's tutorial. We will go through it in detail, showing you the examples of what happens, how it works, how you use it, and what happens if you don't use it correctly. So serialize, all it does, it simply takes the file stream and takes the item and converts it into binary and places it inside the file stream. But it only saves one object at a time, and that is why we need to do it in a for loop so that we can do the items one thing at a time. All it says, it sends this information to the file. That's all it essentially does. Serialization is just the fact that you can convert that into the binary format or into the format for the file to be saved. And then you always close. The moment you open that file stream, you need to close that file stream as well. You always need to make sure that you close that file stream, otherwise it will crash. So in tomorrow's tutorial, we will show that again. For the students that did not watch the tutorial from yesterday, the morning or the evening one, we will show that again tomorrow in terms of what happens if you do this incorrectly, what happens if you open it and not close it, what happens if you send information incorrectly through, if you try and send the entire array. We'll show you all of that. Then over here, we've got the read function. So this button just reads information. Now you'll see this line, which will probably be new to you. So while the file stream.position is less than the file stream.length, identifies the fact that there's still information inside the file. So what this does, it looks at the file stream and it looks at the current position inside the file stream. If you're running it for the first time, for instance, here we open up the file stream, we create the binary formatter, and then we call while file stream.position. That is the first position in the file stream. So if there is something in this file stream, this will be the very first position. This will be position 1. Then it looks at the file stream.length. It looks at the information inside the file stream. So if there is still information inside the file stream, then the length of the file stream will be more than the current position of the file stream. If this length is less than the current position of a file stream, it means there is nothing more in this file. So what this does, it says, is there something for me to read? If there is something for me to read, then let's do the following. If there's nothing for me to read, let's close the file. That's what's going on with this while loop. So we've got a temporary class or a temporary variable over here to store the information from some class. And then we are taking the temporary variable and assigning the information at that position to the temporary variable. So we're saying that from the file stream, convert what we have at a position into some class and assign that to the temporary variable. Then you'll most likely do something with that. Now keep in mind, the way this is being done means that it's only declared locally inside this while loop. The moment this while loop ends, this temporary variable will die with it. You won't have access to it outside of this while loop. So if you actually want to use this information somewhere else in your program, then you'll have to declare the information or the temporary storage or the temporary variable outside your function or at the top of your global variables, depending on how you want to use it. Now, if you get to your second year and your third year, you'll most likely see that every time you work with something, you'll read it from a file, and then when you're done, you'll write it back to a file. So that information will be stored into or collected in the beginning of your program, and then when you're done with the program or when you're done altering the information, you'll send it back to the file or you'll just close it depending on what you're doing with that information. It's not always the case that you're going to change information. So that is why at this point, you're only going to work with file create and file.open. You're either going to open a file that has information inside it and use that information, or you're going to create the file and save information to that file. At that point, we're not going to require you, or at this point, we're not going to require you to open up a file that already has information inside and write to it again. For now, we just want you to get used to the concept itself. Which brings us to sequential files. Is there a more famous, or is there a famous example of one? So if you guys think of sequential files, what do you think sequential files can actually be used for? So those that have gone through the slides before would know that this person always has a tape recorder with him or a tape player with him. Who can remember his name? What is this Sky Lord's name? Chris Rat. You mean Chris Pratt? Okay, so this is Skylord from, what was that movie's name? I can't remember. Sorry, I don't watch crap. I'm kidding. By the way, I'm kidding. All right, so I think this was from Guardians of the Galaxy. Yeah, also Avengers, somewhere in there. So you'll remember that he has this tape player, this Walkman with him at all times. All right, now that tape inside, how do you think that tape works? It works with a magnetic band. Well, essentially a magnetic band, and then there's a small reader that gets placed on top of here, and then it reads the information as this band goes by. So that's one object after the other. The current pointer is where that is being read. So the moment that is read and moves on, it reads the next position. So that occurs in sequence, so it's one after the other. So it reads in one direction, and with the newer ones in two directions, depending on how you use it. But essentially, it's one object after the other. There's no break in it. It's how it's being stored to this. It's one object after the other. Every time you open the file using a file stream object, you start at byte 0. Now, when you start at byte 0, that represents that everything is rewound back to the original position, and you start at the very beginning. To read certain data at a certain point, read all data before that point. So in order for you to find the information inside this this file, you need to go through every single piece of information until you get to the piece of information that you want. A point in a file is determined by the file position pointer. So that point where it's being read, that determines where you are currently. And if you look at our file, when we spoke about reading and writing, especially when you're reading it, you've got that file position. That is the current position of the file. Now, when you start, that starts at position 0. It starts at the very beginning. So this will require that we open or create a file and serialize all the objects one after the other. Keep in mind, it's in sequence. And to get something, you need to read it from the start until you get to the object that you actually want. If we want to read from the file, we need to close the file, reopen it again. This will put our file pointer at the beginning and beginning again and deserialize until we get to the end or to the record we want. All right. It's just kind of giving you an example of how sequential files potentially are used. It's not really something that you'll be using that frequently though. So this is the correct code for everything working and in the correct stage, so not the code before that. So as you can see, it closed on me, hold on. As you can see, we've got our imports at the top. Before this is where your option statements will be. We've got our declaration, we've got our file stream, our binary formatter, and our constant file name that we're storing. We've got the input to our file or to our objects, so just the information to declare them. Now, one thing I want to point out, and this is probably something you will be doing. Most of you will probably take the input within the same button where you're going to save it to your file. Keep in mind that once you open this file to write to it, no one else can read it. So if you're still collecting the information to be written to this file, you're wasting resources because that resource is now consumed. That is open until you close it. My recommendation is when you work with files, only open the file once you know you're going to use it or at the point when you're going to use it and close it immediately afterwards. Don't open the file, create your binary formatter, and then take your input because then you're wasting that resource. So only open it when you have all the information, and the same thing for when you're reading it. Don't open it, do some other things, read it, and then close it. Open it, read, close, and then you can do the other things. Don't waste too much time with that resource being consumed. All right. Now, that being said, you are probably curious about enumeration. So in order to show you this, I'm just going to open up a Visual Studio. We'll probably do this in a blank Visual Studio application. So you can kind of see what it's all about. Now I'm going to show you the syntax, the basic syntax. There is a bit more that you can do with enumerations, but we're showing you the basic example of the enumerations itself. So for those that are curious, the Microsoft website links everything that you'll ever want, all the concepts that you'll need, so you can always go there as well, which most of you, 99% of you, will never do in any case. But I actually do recommend that students read some of these things when they start, especially when it comes to syntax, because we teach you the basics, so that we can go on with the logic of teaching you how to solve a problem. We're not going to teach you everything of a language. That's up to you. If you want to become an expert in a specific language, you're more than welcome to do that. But we're not going to make you experts in a language. You'll have to do that on your own. We'll make you proficient, or in most cases, we'll make you good with the logic. Where do we find it? So this is essentially docs.microsoft.com, and then from there you'll have different locations where you can go to Visual Basic, C#, whatever languages they have inside their applications. I think I have linked to the website before, but basically what you will want is you will want that part. So docs.microsoft /en-us. You've got .NET/visual-basic/language-reference. Or you can just simply Google Microsoft Visual Basics documents, and it will give you a link to the basic outline of it in any case. In any case, when we get to enumerations, you'll see there's a lot more you can do. So you can see you have an attribute list, you can have access modifiers, and you can have shadows for that, and they all explain that. Now, we're not going to go that in depth into enumeration. We're going to stick to the basic format of enumeration. We're not even going to worry about the data type because we're showing it to you in terms of the default, which converts it into an integer in any case. So you begin with the keyword enum that just initiates the fact that there's enumeration going on, and a name for the enumeration, and then the member list of the enumeration, and then you close it. Now, when you work with enumerations, the default value is generally integers. So you'll create your enumeration and you will list what you have. Now, the way it starts with a 0, and how it works is as you list it, that value will increase. So you'll have jumbo, extra large, large, medium, and small, and these are all represented by an integer representation of that value. Now, over here, it's not declared. We specifically want you to declare the values themselves. So instead of having just the name itself, you will have actual assignments. So this one will be a better example. So this one is a security level, and the assignment is -1, 0, and 1. So you will give it an assignment. You'll have a name, that's the enumeration itself, and then the value for that enumeration. And the reason why we do that is so that we can use the name, which makes it easier for our program to understand it. Now, in order for you to see what I'm referring to, I'm going to show you something that you've already used, or hopefully you've already used. So I'm going to work with a file stream. So let's go public file stream as system. Let's just import them. Option strict, because like I said, every time we show you code, I will add them as well. Explicit option infer off. Okay, and then after this, we'll have our imports. All right, so let's see if you can remember the imports. The first one will be system.io. That's our first import. And our second import for our binary formatter, let's see if you can remember this, will be system.runtime.serialization.formatters.binary. See if my memory serves me right. All right, then we've got our file stream, and we've got our binary formatter. Binary formatter. Sorry, I don't put my phone on silent. And I'm lazy today. Okay, just put my phone on silent here for you guys. Sorry about that. Okay, so when we work with this, let's just go and add a button so that we can just have a separation of our functionality. We'll have a button for read, we'll have a button for edit. So when we work with our binary formatter, we'll go file stream equals new file stream. New file stream, and then we'll have our file name, which we'll look at a second, and we'll have our access mode. So let's just look at what's going on here. Import unnecessary. Why are you? Oh, I've got to duplicate it. All right. Let's see. I mistyped serialization. Bad on me for that. Bad on me for that. All right. So when we look at our access, So we've got our file mode. You all remember that. Now file mode itself is actually an enum. As you can see over here, it identifies the fact that it's an enum. So let's go and open that and see what it's actually all about. Let's see if it will allow me to open. Go open. There we go. So when you look at this, there is an enumeration over here. Now they give you some information as well, but this is how it's being used. So the summary basically discusses the different what this specific type is for, and I definitely recommend that you guys can go and read that, but that is not our idea right now. The enumeration itself has a name, but the actual option is a number. So we've got new, which is option 1, create option 2, open option 3, open or create option 4, truncate option 5, and append option 6. Now, these two we are not going to use, but essentially if you don't want to override your file, you can open them with these modes as well. Now, if we go back to our form and click on the option, we've got those options available to us. So we would normally go create. And then we'll have our file mode or our file access, which in itself is also an enum and enumeration. Come on, give me enumeration with the various options here, which is read write or read write. So those are once again values that represent the option that you're going to use. So essentially what it does, it tells you this. So if I do this, you guys understand what this is going to do. This says file mode create, so we know we're going to create a file, and file access write, which means we're going to write to a file. Okay? Now, let's say you have to maintain code, and I give you this. I just go 2 and 1. Come on. Okay, it seems like it is going to give me an probably this. Okay, let's actually read what the error says. Exceptions. Initialize a new instance of file stream class. Okay. If I had to do that, it's probably still going to give me an issue, but if I had to do that, do you guys understand what that does? 2 and 1. If you had to maintain this code and you had no idea what that is, would you understand what those options are? Would you from memory know that option 2 is create and option 1 here is write? No. So it makes it a lot harder to read. Whereas the enumeration, because the enumeration is linked to a number, now this specific function requires that you use the enumeration itself. So it kind of dictates that you have to use that enumeration, which makes it a bit better as well. So it doesn't allow you to just use the actual options, but ultimately it makes it a lot easier to read. Now, you want to create a custom enumeration. You remember that we had informatics, computer science, and business management as options. So let's say when you do your select case, and you want to make sure that you've got everything that you need, you can go and set it up the way you want it. So you can go just say enum for the identifier, what the enum is for, and then declare the enumerations themselves. So we go enum, and our enums represent a subject, and then end enum. So we can have informatics informatics 1, and that can be equal to option 1. Informatics 2, or let's say computer science 2, 1, option 2, and then I can't remember the code for business management, so let's just go business management. option 3. And then you would have some form of input. So I'm just going to skip the input up here, but you'll have some form of input. And in that input, you will ask them, what subject are you entering? So you can have a select case, and that would be based on the value in your input. So I'm just going to declare a variable here so that we can just see public underscore value as integer, so that we don't have the select case giving as an issue. So we have the select case value, and then you can go case, and you can say subject dot informatics. So that represents a 1. So if you go select option 1 for informatics, then your value will be 1. But you can go select case subject.informatics 1, so you know everything under this tab is for informatics, instead of saying select case 1. So it just makes the code more readable. It allows you to see visually inside your code what sections you're specifically working with. All right. Now, I will put all of this, I'll put the enumeration in a slide set for you. I'll upload that tomorrow before the tutorial, so that you can have a look at that and so that you can have it on hand, because you'll probably use it again. But the only purpose for the enumeration right now is to make your code more readable, so that you can have a short description of what's going on. Now, something you might use in the near future is, let's say you've got an option, you've got a result, and you've got a result pass and a result fail, and you want this as string. And you can actually have, and let's see if VB is going to complain about this, you can actually have string representations I've got more things I need to change here. But essentially, you can have constant string representations of values, and then when you get to your actual message, you can say output enum.parse, and it will output the full value for you. Just take that away. It's still going to complain, by the way, so don't worry too much about that. It's just a formatting issue for me right now. So it makes it useful to have things on hand. But by default, an enum is always an integer, but you can have different data types to that. So you'll most likely always use it as an integer, but I'm just showing you a different method of how you can use it as well. Now, we are running slightly over time, so that's why I'll put all of this in a slide for you. I just want to show you the website as well, because I always use this website, the official Microsoft documents, when I set up your slides, to make sure whatever we show you is up to date. It's with the latest information, the latest updates to the language. So you kind of get the latest as well, but it's not always everything. We just show you a small section of it. We don't show you everything. And you guys need to be aware of that. We only show you what is needed for your current situation, or logically what you need. It's one of the reasons why you'll be able to learn a new language so easy, because we show you how to think about it, how to design it, and then all it is, you just need to know what the syntax is of the language to be able to code it out, which is a very big benefit for you guys. All right, now I am running over time here. I'm going to stop the recording in a second. So if you have any questions, please, you can drop it in the Discord. Those that are live here with me right now, you can ask questions. I'll remain online. I just don't want the recording to exceed the actual lecture time itself. Otherwise, it's kind of unfair if you have any other things you need to catch up on. All right, so if you're confused about file streams, if you're still struggling slightly with file streams, please go and watch the tutorial from Tuesday morning. If you're comfortable with file streams and you want to see the options that there are and you want to see how someone breaks it, go and watch the file stream in the Tuesday evening tutorial, where I only worked with file streams at the binary format and purposefully broke them, so that you can see what happens if you break them. Other than that, I hope you guys have a lovely day further, and I'll see you tomorrow in the lecture.